Hello, my name is Dave Hussman. I am the owner of the Bloomington and Northern branch. In this installment, we're going to talk about laying the ties in preparation for hand laying track on the French Creek branch of the Wilmington and Northern Railroad. Please join us and watch along.
I use under the table mounted switch mechanism, so I have to drill out a slot for the switch mechanism before I lay the ties. I start by drilling 3 holes across the width of the roadbed. I then take my shop vac and place the nozzle underneath the roadbed. The suction will adhere the nozzle to the bottom of the roadbed. Then I use a rotary cutting tool and a motor tool to wallow out the slot. This gives me a nice clean slot for my switch mechanism. To stain my ties, I use a product that is a leather dye. I use either black or a mixture of black and brown. I get it at shoe repair locations, or it's available online. I use a large wide mouth jar, put some of the dye in there and thin it with alcohol such as shellac thinner or camping stove fuel. Add the ties in here, just dump them in. I prefer, I use Kapler ties for most of my track and building. That's a white pine material. I'll soak them in push them down into the dye mixture. If I put in a double batch, I'll put this plug in the top of the jar to hold the ties down in the dye bath while they soak. And I'll let that soak for several hours or overnight as required. Of course, I cover it to keep the alcohol vapors inside. When it's soaked, I will remove the plug. I actually added a double batch of ties to the mixture. And then I'll use a pair of tweezers. These are actually designed for stamps, but I'll use a pair of tweezers to start bringing the ties out. I have an old cookie sheet and put some layers of paper towel on there, and then use the tweezers to start pulling out the stained ties. You can see how long you need to leave them to get the desired color.
Once you have all your ties dyed and you have sufficient, it's time to make tie strips in order to put ties where the non-switch area is. I use something called a piano jig. I have 2 of them. My oldest one was made out of wood. It's just a 1x4 with some balsa wood and basswood strip wood. And I put down 2 switch templates and then put basswood strips in between the ties there. This was designed so that I could cut switch ties out for left and right. I don't use that method anymore, but this is one of the old tie strip that I had. And then this is my newer one. It's a piece of plastic, and it has 2 spacings. It has one for the main line and one for the yard, different tie spacings depending on how what they used. It's made out of a plastic and evergreen strips. The way I use this is, it's called a piano jig because it'll look like piano keys when you get the ties in. You basically have it sitting on a table, and you simply insert the ties in the slots between the spacers, and this goes pretty quick. If you'll notice, I'm not doing this at the layout. That's because most of the time when I do this thing, I'll do it either in the den or in the someplace where I have access to a TV, and I'll watch TV while I'm doing this. Now, when I get it finished, I have a roll of masking tape, and I've used a utility knife to cut the 3/4 inch wide masking tape into 3/4 inch wide strips. That's really about all you need to hold this together. Take a long piece, put it over one edge. You can put it in the middle, but I like to put it at one edge because it makes it easier to apply them. And put the masking tape on there, and then carefully lift the ties out. Some of the wider ties that might get stuck in the slots may need a little coaxing, but there we take it out, and now we have a strip of ties ready to install in the layout.
To lay the ties, I'll start with a bead of glue between the lines that we drew on the layout and in the earlier video. And I'll use a small brush, like an acid brush is what we called it, to spread out the glue. This is a 50-50 water and white glue mix. It doesn't have to be really thick, it can be fairly thin. Once we get that all spread evenly, I'll take our tie strips and put them into position and line them up roughly within the lines. Once I get them all in position, I'll take a metal putty knife or a scraper and use that to hold down the ties while I pull up the masking tape. The wider the spatula, the more ties you can pull up at once. Then it'll be time to line the ties up in exact length. I use a straight edge. You can use the straight side to get it perfectly straight, or you can flex it to line up the edges for curves.
We'll begin laying the switch ties on the switch template. I do those a little bit different than the regular straight tracks in that. We glued down a switch template to hand lay the switches over. I could make a tie strip that used the switch ties on it to go through there, but I have found that there's an easier way. We'll start by putting down the glue mixture, once again, the 50-50 water and white glue. Spread that evenly across the switch template and use the brush to make a nice even coat across all the switch ties. We'll smooth that out on a number 5 or even possibly number 6 switch. You can get all the ties laid on it before the glue dries. Otherwise, you might have to come back and just add a little bit more of the glue mixture to freshen up the glue and make it sticky. Then I'll use individual ties starting at the head blocks where the points are, and individually place the switch ties. I will line the switch ties up with the diverging side, the curved side of the switch, putting them over the ties on the template so I get the proper spacing and I get the proper alignment with the length of the ties. It goes actually a lot quicker than you would think, and I'll get all the ties in there. When all the switch ties are in place and the glue has dried, it is time now to trim the ties so they have a nice even line. Everything is in line on the curve side. And now let's trim off the straight side of the switch. I'll use a straight edge, lining it up with the end ties. A lot of times I'll use a push pin to hold the straight edge in place, so if I apply pressure to it, the straight edge doesn't move. And then I'll use a very sharp new blade in a either hobby knife or utility knife, and taking pains not to cut through the head blocks. I will score the switch ties along the straight edge. And I found dragging it at a shallow angle works the best. It will, a brand new sharp blade will cut through the switch ties very quickly. Once I've scored it, I will use the blade to go through and cut any of the ties that haven't already been sliced through. And once again, a new blade makes this very easy to do. Watching out for the head blocks. We don't want to cut through those. And once we get everything cut, we'll just take the switches. It may pull up a little bit of the paint or a little bit of the surface of whatever you have on it, but that's not going to hurt anything. And we'll trim it all off. There may be some little pieces that you have to even up. But now we have all the switch ties to length, a nice straight side, nice curved side, and we didn't have to have any kind of measuring or individual ties cut. Once I get all the ties in place, both the switches and the main track and sidings, I'll sand the top of the ties with this sanding block. It uses a 3-inch by 21-inch belt sander belt around this block. It's very handy for sanding the ties because it has a very long flat surface. So I will gently sand the tops of the ties. All I want to do is just make sure they're nice and level, remove any kind of imperfections or places where they're uneven. Once I get the tops of the ties sanded off nice and smooth, I'll then take 60 grit sandpaper, very coarse sandpaper, and then I will come across the ties and at angles and roughly sand it. And what that does is that puts a little grain into the wood and will make it look more like it's a weathered tie that's been out in the out under the sun for a long time. And the final step in the tie preparation is to take some of the tie stain and go over the sanded ties and just touch up the tops with a little bit of the stain that I used for the ties. Doesn't have to be a heavy coat, just a little light touch to bring everything back into the color of the ties. I'll let that dry for a couple days and then it'll be time for ballasting. The last part of the tie assembly and the tie process is to take a white, gray, or even silver pencil, and then where I have the templates, switch templates, I will take and I will put a little white mark above the rails along the ties, and I will do that several places along here just as a kind of a marker so that I know what where my rails are. I'll also mark where the guardrails end, and do that for all of my switches coming along here. And that gives me an idea when I come to lay rail where I need to put my curved stock rail. And that makes it much easier to assemble the switches. I actually don't I use the position of the rails and that to actually do the final positioning, but this gives me an idea of where I can start off and as a check on where the rails should be. That finishes off the tie project part of the French Creek branch extension. The next step is ballast and rails. I hope you join me for those videos also. Thank you for watching.
I start by break, 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 break.